Hello everyone, we'll do some small testing before we start. Okay, just let me know if you can hear me and we can actually start with the webinar. There is probably a 20-second delay or something. For now I only see familiar faces in the chat. But I think I will just start the presentation and people can join in the meantime. Welcome everyone to SelfCAD for Beginners. My name is Peter Chrapkiewicz. I'm the tech developer in SelfCAD, but today I'm going to be here for you to explain different approaches used in basic 3D modeling to create the same shapes with different ideas. This will help you to understand which methods to use to become much more flexible with your designs. I'm going to try to create a simple windmill with a building and some trees next to it. If we have enough time, I will also show how to make a simple animation like this. The presentation is divided into a few segments. You can leave questions in the chat all the time. Please try to keep it related to the currently discussed topics. I will turn off the face camera from turn on and off the camera from time to time. So when I show the settings, it will not be in the way. I hope you don't mind. This is SelfCAD for beginners. I will go to the website view so we can actually start from scratch. Go to selfcad.com and create an account if you already have one. Log in. Once you logged into your account, you can press the Launch Editor button. The software loads and you get to see the SelfCAD project view. I already have a few projects created, but let's make a new one. Create new 3D project button. You can type in the name you want to choose for your project. I will call it P4. I'm pretty sure you will be much more precise with the namings than me. Before we finalize, there are a few settings that you can change, which are workspace size, workspace size, segment size, and orientation. I would not recommend to change those settings for now. I will explain them during the course. Let's create. After a few seconds, you get to see your first project, unless you created one before. The editor starts with a default cube in the center of the workspace. If you remember on the last screen, we had settings called workspace size and segment size. If you count the squares between the lines in each direction, you will notice that there are 14 of those. What does it mean? It means that because our segment size is 50, multiplied by 14 gives us 700, which is the workspace size in millimeters. I hope this will make much more sense later on. The thing that allows you to see the scene with the current view is the camera. To navigate the camera, you can use gestures or the camera cube, which is by default in the top left corner of the viewport. You can change the view by clicking on one of the labels and later on the arrows. To go back to the initial view, click on the reset camera icon. To use gestures, click on the workspace and move the cursor. You can use either rotation, which is set by default, pan, or zoom. I'm using a mouse, so I will use mouse gestures. There are different gestures for touch events as well. While modeling, I leave rotation enabled as it is. For pan, I'm using the middle mouse button or keyboard arrows. For zoom, the mouse wheel. Now let's take a look at the object list. On the right side panel, you can see the snapshots of all the objects that are currently in the scene. The cube is by default selected. To deselect it, uncheck the selection mark, click on the mesh or on the workspace. You should also notice that checking the selection mark or clicking on the mesh results in selecting it. Selection in any 3D software is the key to determine with which piece you want to work at the current moment. From here, you have a few options. One of them is to get rid of the shape you just created by deleting it. To do so, you can press Delete or Backspace on your keyboard, the delete icon from the quick bar, or the top header menu in Edit section. Once your scene is empty, you can start designing your first real project. We will start with creating a low polygon house. Very simple. There are a few ways to do it. The first method is to use multiple shapes and combine them. We are going to use 2 cubes for this. Go to 3D shapes and choose cube from the drop-down. We are not going to change any of those settings for now. I will explain them later. Let's confirm. Another way to bring primitives into the scene is to use the drag and drop functionality. Go to 3D shapes again and simply drag the cube to the scene and drop it wherever you wish to. Let's rename our primitives to get a better idea of what is what. To do so, just click on the label below the object snapshot. I will name one of the cubes as cube 1 and the other one as wedge 1. Before we move on, I will explain what transformations are in SelfCAD. The basic ones are move, rotate, scale, and then we have deformations: skew, taper, twist, bend, inflate, flatten. Reshape has a slightly different workflow, so we are not going to discuss it for now. To use transformations, let's start with move. You get to work with gizmos and inputs. Gizmos are easier to use, inputs are much more precise. To move your mesh with gizmos, click on one of them, hold and move the cursor. You can also enter the exact value on the left side panel. Another transformation is scale. We are going to make both of the cubes smaller by selecting them, enabling scale, and typing 50 next to the Y label. Next, we are going to use taper, and we will create a wedge-like shape, hence the name. We will use it as a roof for our house. Deselect cube 1, go to taper, and use the red gizmo and move it to achieve something similar to this. Once this is done, we need to put the piece on top of the cube. You could use move transformation to do so, but you can also use the align tool from utilities. A reference here is nothing else as the element you want to align to, so we need to choose cube 1. By default we align to the bottom front, so we need to change it to top and center. This way, if we select both of them, we get our first low poly house model. Not too fancy, but that's enough for landscapes or for games where the camera is actually quite far away from the model, so you won't see details anyway. To combine objects, you can use grouping, merging, or union. Let's group them for now by choosing Group from the top header menu. And now you can see that we have only one mesh in the object list called Group 1. Let me delete it for now by choosing Delete All from the Edit menu. The second method I'm going to show is using the cube generator. Go to 3D shapes again, and choose the cube from the dropdown. Let's explain the settings for the cube primitive. Width, height, and the depth are describing the dimensions from the shape. You can play around with the settings to see how it works. I'm going to set the values to 100 for width, 50 for height, and 100 for depth. I'm sorry, misclicked. Before we continue, let's take a few steps back. To take a step back in any software, you can use the undo operation. You can click on the undo arrow on the quick bar or use the hotkey combination Ctrl-Z. Notice that when I'm undoing while the cube generation tool is active, it first reverses the changes I've made here. Once there is nothing to undo, a confirmation message pops up and I can close the tool. I could also close it straight away without having to do all of those actions. One more step and we got our previous design back into the scene. I'm going to explain a little geometry topology now. It might sound a little scary, but you only need to know the basics. Each mesh contains of faces, edges, and vertices. You can see those listed on the selection cube on the right side panel. Right now, you only get to see the basic rendering, but if you choose, for example, edge, it will show you this hint. To see the details, turn on Mesh plus Wireframe render mode. You can press on the button to enable it, but I will show you a different method, so I will skip it for now. Below the selection tools, you have 4 icons from the left: Mesh, Wireframe, Mesh plus Wireframe, and Smooth. Those affect how the meshes are being rendered. Let's enable Mesh plus Wireframe from here. If you start hovering on the model right now, you will notice that the lines called edges are getting highlighted. This tells you which element will be selected when you click. For all modes, clicking on the workspace or on the same element results in deselecting it. If I enable vertex selection mode, I get to see those small squares which represent vertices. Faces are either triangles or quads in SelfCAD. You can select multiple of them at once for more flexibility. We will hide the object for now by clicking the hide option on the gear drop-down on the right side panel. You can also find it under View in the top header menu or the hotkey combination V plus H. Okay, back to creating a house using the cube primitive tool. Let's set the height back to 50 and move the cube on the x-axis by 150. What we are going to change as well is the width segment amount to 2. You will notice that it actually added some edges in the middle of the shape. Let's finalize. The last thing we need to do is to select the top middle edge by choosing edge selection and going to move transformation. We are going to put 100 in the Y label, which actually will create which result in creating a wedge from our cube, and our low polygon building is actually ready. If we unhide the previous design, you will notice that there is a small difference in how it looks on the top, and the edges also have a different structure. The last method that I'm going to show, although there are a few more for sure, is using Freehand. You will find it in the drawing drop-down. We will use line drawing. To make it easier to draw straight lines, we will go to precision settings and turn minimum step size and minimal angle size on. This lets us draw points on each 10th unit, and the angle won't go lower than 50 degrees for each line, based on both of those values in the inputs next to the labels. Let's draw the front profile of our small house. Before we finalize, we will go to the height settings and set the height to 100. Finalize. Now let's see if we can rotate the mesh using the rotate tool. There are three gizmos with colors that are equal to the XYZ axis. We will choose the red one to rotate around the X axis. This way we created almost 3 identical models with 3 different methods. I will remove those 2 and leave the one remaining and actually hide it for now. Okay, if you have any questions about this segment, please feel free to ask now. I will continue the presentation in 5 minutes. Okay, so Tom asked, what is the purpose of union and merge? Grouping basically allows you to keep the structure, so you can actually ungroup. So if I, for example, group now, I can go to ungroup, which gives me the flexibility to actually work with the pieces separately, and I mean with the piece as one, and then if I modify certain parts, I can always go back and just modify the pieces that are actually building the current shape. This has one flaw, which is that the topology is actually not being affected, so we don't do anything with it. If you merge, we actually combine vertices. So if you have 2 vertices on the same position, they actually are going to be merged. And if there are faces that are on the same position, they are also going to be combined. So this gives you a little more functionality when it comes to topology. And union actually makes a bigger difference because the meshes that come out from union are actually watertight, which means that if you, for example, merge 2 objects which would result in faces that being inside of the mesh, let's say even this example, if you do a union, you actually remove the inner parts and the object is actually ready for printing after union. Okay, I think that's actually the only question. All right, so let's actually move on. Okay, so where were we? Okay, so then the next thing that I'm going to show is designing the actual windmill. I'm going to show 2 methods, how you can create more advanced regular shapes by using either extrusion and inset or shape generator. First method, before using extrusion or inset, we need a base. We are going to use freehand drawing again. This time we are going to use circle drawing. We are going to change the amount of edges to 8 and draw in the center of the workspace. Something like this. Let's finalize. Actually forgot to change the size to 10, so I will just do it with scaling. I will call this element base. Let's copy our base 2 times by choosing copy from the quick bar or using the hotkey combination Ctrl+C. Another way to copy is to Ctrl-drag the shape. Those blue and green lines help you to align the shape with the previous piece. Let's hide the copies for now by selecting them and choosing hide from the right side panel. We need to select the top of our base. for which we are going to use Polygon Selection mode from the selection cube. Polygons, if you hover on the mesh, you will notice the entire top of our base gets highlighted. The reason for that is that we have an inbuilt topology structure that keeps faces indexed together, so it's easier to interact with them. This is where polygons actually become very helpful. Instead of just using faces, you can actually select entire flat surfaces, which makes it easier to work with certain pieces. Click to select. Turn on Extrusion Tool, which you can find under Modify. Extrusion allows you to extend your shapes by adding additional details, which you can use for different purposes. You will see a few settings on the left side panel. They all have their use cases, but we are just going to change the amount for now. Set it to 60 and finalize. Next step is to scale. Don't deselect the polygon, so it's easier to apply the modifications. In advanced settings of the Scale tool, you can find a switcher called Keep Proportion. We turn it on so we don't lose the regular shape we have on top of our model. Scale it down to 80. And let's close it. I will just show a different method to achieve the next step, different from what we are actually going to do in the end. I will just briefly explain it, so don't feel bad if you get lost in the process. You can use a combination of extrusion, move, and scale to achieve sideways extrusion. Extrude by any value that you want. Just remember it. Scale the selection up again. Let's do it 90. And go to move and put the position to the position without the extrusion. So in our case 5, so it will result in the position 70. And now we need to go to extrusion again, and if you see, this actually creates a sideways extrusion once I finalize. This is not what we are going to use, because we want to actually use a simple method of putting pieces together, so I will actually undo this for now. Okay, so we are going to unhide one of the remaining pieces, it doesn't matter which one for now. And we are going to use align to align this element to our base. I will call this element floor. Go to align, and this time we are going to choose base as our reference. This message pops up when you actually go outside of the workspace. Right now I have the alignment set to bottom, which would actually result in positioning the piece below the workspace. So what we do in SelfCAD, we actually position everything in the workspace, so it's easier to understand the dimensions that you are actually working with. So what I need to do is to change the alignment settings to top center. We need to make it a little smaller. For the Y direction, I'm going to use the gizmo. And for X and Z, I will type 90 into the input. I will select the top polygon once again. And this time we are going to use inset. Inset allows you to add details similar to extrusion, but this time sideways, by creating an offset based on your current selection. Let's set it to 5 and finalize. Now back to extrusion, and let's set the amount to 40. and finalize. Unhide the last piece and let's call it roof. We need to do the same steps as before. This time we need to put the roof on the floor piece. Once again by using align and setting the reference to this time to floor and to top center as well. We also need to repeat the scaling process. And also the insert step as well. Now we are going to extrude once again, this time by 30. And to finalize our piece, we actually need to scale the top quite a lot. I will just do it manually like this. And here we actually have it, our base for our windmill and the building. The only thing that we still are missing is some fancy wings. Before we continue though, I want to show a different method to create the same shape by using shape generator. I will group those objects and move them a little to the back so we can actually use them as a reference. The generator can be found under 3D shapes by the label shape. Click to enable. There are a couple of things we are going to use from this panel. Top and bottom radius for sure, and the segment section as well. This tool allows you to do all the things we did with extrusion and inset, but in one single tool by using the segment settings. Before we start, uncheck Hide All Objects to see our previous model. Our first segment will have a radius of 50 for both bottom and top. Number of edges set to 8 and a height of 10. Notice that this actually creates the same piece that we had in for our base. Let's build up. Click on the plus icon to add on segment and set the top radius to 40 and the height to 60. If you remember, this was using earlier extrusion and scaling. Here we can actually do it in one segment. Add another segment. This time we will set both bottom and top radius to 45 and the height to 5. And we have the same element as here. This is even better because here we actually had still polygons inside, and this automatically makes a hole inside, so you end up having actually a watertight mesh in the end. And the next segment. The next segment has bottom and top radius 40. And the height is set to 40 as well. Another segment, similar to the previous one, 45 for bottom radius and top, and the height set to 5. And now the roof, bottom radius to 40, top radius we are going to set to 3. And we also need to change the height to 30. And we can actually finalize. And as you can see, we actually created the same model just in a single tool by doing segments. I will remove the previously created group and unhide our first building. Before we move on, let's position this a little better. Okay, I think this should be fine. Okay, in the next segment, I'm going to actually show how to create wings with freehand drawing. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. I will also go over the chat and see if I can answer any questions that are already there. Okay, I actually don't see any questions. So I guess I will just move on with creating the wings for now. We might have more time this way later to actually play around more with the animations. The next thing we are going to do is to create actual wings by using freehand drawing. Let me hide those objects for now once again. And we are going to use brush drawing this time. We will change the brush size to 5. The way I'm going to draw this is I still have the precision settings enabled from previous drawing. So the way I'm going to draw this is to actually count like steps from the movements from the center line. So for the first line, I'm going to go 2 steps left and 4 steps right. The same for the second line. The third line will be a little closer, so I will only go 2 steps and then also 4 steps left. And I need the same distance for the last segment, so I'm going just to draw it this way. Now the perpendicular lines. Notice that if you close the shape, the inner part actually gets marked red. This means that those parts won't be filled when you finalize. In the middle, we draw a base which will hold everything together. Let's add details to make the wings nicer. This requires some manual work, but with the precision enabled, it's actually not that bad. If you make a mistake, you can always press on the undo button just to undo the current action. It actually might look better if you make a mistake. It wouldn't look that regular, so maybe it actually would make a better effect, but I will just do it this way for now. It's up to you how you actually fill those parts. Before we finalize, I will go to the height settings and change the size to change the height to 2, and we can finalize. You can see that we actually created some nice part for our wings. I will move the shape so the end part is actually in the center of our workspace. Now we are going to use copy offset. This tool allows you to create copies of the current selection by applying transformation for each next copy created. So if you want to start doing copies, but in the meantime you actually want to apply some transformations, this is the tool that you can actually use here. We are going to use pivot, and the reason why I put the end of the wing in the center of the workspace is because this is where the point 0, 0, 0 is, and this is what we actually want to pivot around. Let's change the number of copies to 3 and apply. And here we actually have our first windmill wings created. We need something to attach the wings to the building itself. To do this, I will actually go to cylinder from 3D shape. Once again, we are going to uncheck the hide all objects, and we are going to change the bottom and top radius so it actually fits the model. Go to 3. I think this should be about right, and we also need to change the height. I will make it 5 might be not enough. Let's make it 10. So we can select everything, and we can actually group it together by choosing group from the top header menu. Now we are going to unhide our previous objects. I will actually rotate the windmill object also a little before I continue. And now we are going to change the size of the wings because they are for sure too big. So we are going to once again go to keep proportion, and we are going to change the size to something that fits the building. I think maybe 200. Yeah, it should be all right. And now we need to rotate the wings so we can actually position them on the building. I actually rotated in the wrong direction, so I will just flip it like that, and now we can actually position it towards the building. I could use align or snap tool here as well, but I will just do it manually for now. I will also rotate them a little so they don't collide with the building when we actually start doing the animation. And here we have it, our first wings and the windmill and a building. The next thing that I'm going to show is importing objects, and also show that you can actually find things in my mini factory. If you have any questions related to freehand drawing, feel free to actually ask them. Okay. Yeah, I actually will not use colors. I will make everything even gray in the end. So sorry, no fun today. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to show, and because we probably will end up having a little more time, because we don't have any questions for now, is I'm actually going to show because I'm actually going to show now how to import objects, and we will add those trees that you saw earlier. So the thing that I'm actually going to do is I'm going to also show how to create them, not only by importing. But okay, let's move to the importing part. Let's once again, actually we don't really need to hide those objects right now. SelfCAD partners with my mini factory. You can actually find a lot of objects here. If you type in SelfCAD, we also have some nice objects here. And one of the objects that you can actually find here is the SelfCAD tree, which is the design by Alena. Big thanks to the designing team in general. And I already imported this object earlier, and I prepared like just a part of it, and I called it low poly tree. So you can actually see it here. Usually when you find some objects that you actually want to use in your projects, in a lot of cases it actually has some pieces attached to it that you would like to remove. So one of the methods that you can actually use is cube selection. You will notice that a cube-like wireframe is generated around the object when you enter it. To see the effect, you can start, for example, using the gizmos or changing the sliders here. What I'm going to do is I'm going only to select the bottom part. This tool actually also cuts the geometry straight away if you have the exact selection switcher on. If you turn it off, it only finds the faces or polygons that are entirely in the selection box. So I'm going to actually finalize it this way, and I'm going to delete it. The downside of this operation is that if you go to the bottom view, you will also actually notice that there is a hole. To fix it, you can actually go to Tools, Fill Polygons, and use this tool, which will automatically fill all the holes, and you actually end up having a ready model. We can scale it down so it fits actually to the size of the buildings. And I'm going to create 2 copies of it by choosing control drag, so we can actually have a little more depth to the scene here. I will rotate them also a little, and I will change the color to silver. Okay, so the last thing that we are going to do with this object, with those models, is actually to add an animation. The way you add animation in SelfCAD is by enabling the animation panel and pressing record animation, and then going to simple transformations and just applying a transformation so it will affect the object. So what I did is a 360 rotation just to record my animation, my movement of the wings. If I go to the animation panel, I extended the animation to 8 seconds just to make it a little slower. If I enable, you can actually see that it results in rotating the animation, and here you go, a windmill landscape with some low polygon objects. Okay, so this is pretty much what I prepared. I was expecting a little more questions, but I can actually show a few more things that we can do with the animation tool. So what I'm going to do might be a little more advanced for beginners, but I hope we can actually make it work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make a door opening here in the on this building. So the way I can actually achieve it is by using cutting. So I'm going to use 3D sketch and start drawing on this object to actually generate some additional details. I'm going to draw 2 lines that will connect the edges on the bottom and the center, and I'm actually going to select this object and go to cut with profile, and this will result in actually generating additional geometry in those in places where I added those lines. Because I want the door to open and not be attached, I'm actually going to first go select it with face selection and go to split. This will result in removing detaching the object from the original one, and we can actually start using it to our animation. I will go to record animation once again, and now I'm going to start rotating. So to actually rotate it correctly, I mean, I could rotate it in any direction, but just to make it like simple, I will actually choose a pivot point that is on the edge of the face. So what I'm going to do is change the origin from center to, in this case, it will be actually the left origin, and I'm going to simply rotate the door 90 degrees. It's not really perfect, but I think for the purpose of this animation, it should actually be okay. So we have two objects that are having animations right now, and let's try to see if we can actually do something with it. Okay, and more or less it actually achieves the end result. Okay, I see that Tom has some questions. You did not see how the cube selection was used. I can show it again if you want. So I will import my low poly tree once again and just show how the cube selection is done. The cube selection is on the right side panel next to the other selection tools. If you enable it, you get to use gizmos or sliders to actually change the size of the cube. So if I move the gizmo, for example, down, it actually scales down the selection cube. And you can use it to select parts of objects, and later if you finalize it, converts to an actual selection, and you can just simply remove it or do anything else that you actually want to achieve. Okay, so the compass, I call it the protractor actually, has this kind of logic where if you are in the center of the protractor or the compass, it actually has a step, a 22.5 degree step, which allows you to set the positions like 45, 90, and so on easier. So the thing that you need to do is go out a little. Now you can actually see that the step became 1 degree, and you can set your rotation much more precise. Okay, so if there are no other questions, then I think we are actually going to stop it here. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. I hope we can actually make something similar happen very soon. Take care and bye.